Silence may be one of the most valuable commodities of the 21st century. We live in a world absolutely inundated with noise, chaos, confusion. It's nonstop. And so I want to talk for a moment, ironically enough, about not saying anything. I'm Pastor Russ Yoke. Welcome to the LunchBox Devotions. We're glad to have you today. I feel like I've reached that certain age where I tell my kids things about what life was like when I was their age, and they give me that look like I'm 10,000 years old. You know, I think one of the things that has been the most drastic shift from when I was my children's age to their age now is the omnipresence of media in their lives. They have a non-stop source of television, videos, movies, radio, music, you name it. It is absolutely 100% available 100% of the time, which is amazing if you think about life not that long ago. You look back just 30 years ago, and at a certain hour of the day, even television went off. There would be the playing of the national anthem, and then you would get that little emergency symbol saying, hey, everything's going off. You would get that sort of rainbow pattern and then static. And what's more, you didn't necessarily always have access to endless channels, cable TV not being a thing yet. And of course, the amazing bit is, I was talking to my oldest daughter the other day. I said, you realize you're older than Google? And she gave me a funny look. I said, yeah, you're 20 years old. Google isn't 20 years old. In fact, most of the internet as we know it is less than 20 years old. We've changed the world so drastically in the last 20 years that an endless stream of information, data, words, music, images has just sort of become our normal. And frankly, there's no static, no silence, no calm, no pause, no respite. And I think we've got a whole generation of folks out there who find it hard to find peace in silence. And yet I have to say, I think silence may be one of the most valuable commodities of the 21st century, because one of the ways you determine the value of a commodity is its rareness. And the ability to have silence is so rare in the world that we live in today. Now, I think we have all convinced ourselves that we can't live without our noise. I know sometimes when I go to visit friends of mine who live in West Virginia, I don't have cell phone coverage. And because I don't have cell phone coverage, I am cut off from the constant stream of messages, constant stream of internet access, constant stream of phone calls, texts, Facebook, you name it. And I have to say, I feel a little isolated in those moments. It doesn't last very long. I usually have a few moments of feeling isolated and then very rapidly enjoy the isolation from all that, because I'm not responsible any longer for reading or listening or looking at any of the content that the world relentlessly produces. And that's an amazing concept unto itself. There is a certain societal pressure to keep up. Have you heard the latest of this? Have you seen the latest of that? Oh, you're not familiar with this trend. How could you have missed this trend? It's 36 hours old. Where have you been? We live in a world that relentlessly forces us, and really honestly kind of guilts us into staying perpetually connected to whatever the most recent, up to date, up to the second events are going on. And silence is almost seen as a shirking of our societal duties. Cutting ourselves off from this data stream that has taken over our reality. Is that not antisocial? To cut yourself off and simply engage in silence? But I'm going to say I think silence is actually an essential element in the life of faith. We can't exist with God without silence, because God is not inclined to shout. God doesn't yell his instructions and compete with the noise of the world. God expects us to listen. God expects us to attend to his will. God expects us to attend to his word. God expects us to make space. Be still and know that I am God, he says. How bad are we at being still in the 21st century? People sometimes feel like, God is not speaking to them, or God is not engaging with them, or they feel like God is far away. And the example that I always give is when I lived far, far out in the country in West Virginia. I could stand at the far edge of my yard and almost have an ordinary conversation with my wife, who would be standing in the doorway of our house without really having to shout. And yet when we visit cities, I noticed the one day that we were crossing the street in New York, and I had gotten to the other side of the street. My wife had not yet been able to make the crossing, just an ordinary 2-lane street. And we could not communicate with each other across the span of those 2 lanes because there was simply too much ambient noise. That's the life that humans seem to be leading right now. It's not that God isn't speaking to us. It's not that God isn't engaging us. But if we never pause, we never take a moment, we never be silent, we're not going to hear the perpetual voice of God that is still whispering in all of our ears. So I say to you all today, ask yourself this question. How noisy is your life? How valuable are those things that make noise in your life? And are you making space for silence in order that something marvelous might be said to you? I've been Pastor Russ Yoke. Thank you for hanging out with me for lunch, and God bless, and see you next week.